Hi, I'm Austin Wade Smith. I'm the executive director of the Regen Foundation, and we are the nonprofit arm of the larger Regen network. And the talk I'm going to give today is called Regeneration as a Protocol, the Shape of DAOs to Come, named after one of my favorite Ornette Coleman albums. Just to give a little context about what the Regen Foundation is, we pilot foundational research on the ethics and techniques of ecological accounting at a grassroots level. And we're interested in what is the eco-social life of decentralized protocols from a level of ownership, governance, sensing, and verification. And you've heard a lot about community ownership of regeneration and the definition of that in a lot of other presentations, particularly around the Shadow Mensa credit and the introduction to the registry. And the foundation really dials that in the kind of specifics of pilot implementation. So every group I'm going to show you is a group that we actively work with every week, every month. They're not stock photos. They're groups that we are active in collaboration with building DAOs. So what I'd like to do here is walk us through what DAOs are. And Jake just made a joke that said that no one knows what DAOs are, and that's fine. And I would probably agree with that. But I'll try to give a stab at what they are from the context of regenerative economics and try to do that from first principles, essentially. And then try to map out a space about what DAOs might look like in this emerging field that we're in, and then conclude with some pretty cool, exciting ones that the foundation is developing in partnership with the registry and R&D, and also with some Earth lawyers. And they're new in a way, but they're also tapping into legacies that I think are very old. So with that, let's go. I'm going to start out with a hot take. Maybe you'll see how hot it is that ecological data is financial data. They're just one and the same thing. And that the planet keeps the score. The Earth is the ultimate ledger. We've kind of lost sight of that, but that's comforting for me to say and hear. So we might view the climate crisis that we're currently undergoing as a consequence of this sort of systemic unresolved debt that we have to our own habitat. And it's compromising everything. And if I were to try to venture to define regenerative economics, I might say that it's a kind of accounting that tries to keep a balance between the credits and the debits that we have to the living world, the Earth. So by and large, the extractive paradigm that most of us inherited has left our ability to see the consequences of these debts that are unpaid in a way. Our ability to see those is dramatically underdeveloped. We have a hard time seeing the consequence of our own action. I'll try to stop and say who they are every time. This is GVK Society in northern India that works on regenerative agriculture. And they're doing a farm plot diary, trying to do a measure of what the state of the well-being is of their farm on an ongoing basis. So in order to do real accounting, not fake accounting, we have to be able to see the state of the living world and input that into our balance sheet. We have to build the planetary sense faculties to do that. And we might easily talk about how that plays out at a planetary level, but at the foundation, we focus on how that works at a grassroots level, and building community literacy around ecological state. And that's really our focus. So this group, Canopy Collective, sorry, it's kind of hard to see in this at this time of day, works with indigenous communities in India, particularly around biodiversity identification and tracking the loss of keystone, mostly birds, in their region. Okay, so I said that the Earth is the ultimate ledger, and I think that's true. And I'd say that the Regen ledger is a blockchain that tries to function like a planetary ledger, that we're building a software infrastructure that maintains some level of parity between the biophysical ledger, which is the Earth, and a digital ledger that's a piece of software. And we've been talking about that in various forms. Talking about distributed ledgers and decentralized ledgers and blockchain is not something that this audience is probably unfamiliar with at all. I would suggest that one of the most common themes for participants in Denver this weekend and this whole week is around the notion of decentralized ownership of the record keeping. And so I'll call that generally a decentralized protocol of ownership. And I think DAOs are really powerful frameworks to do this kind of stuff with. It's an opportunity to steward digital knowledge commons, like what a blockchain is, as well as biophysical commons. And people have been stewarding biophysical commons for a really long time. And so DAOs are a way to just to think about commons in a new way. I don't think they're different. I think we came up with a new way to describe commons. And I'd like to see the conversation. I'm enjoying seeing how the conversation is shifting from consensus algorithms or particular kinds of speculation to much more about commonsing and mutualism. Keeping both track of a sort of biophysical web and a digital web is a matter of governance. And so that's kind of what we're really talking about when we talk about DAOs. So in addition to being protocols of ownership, they can be protocols for sensing and verification processes. All of these ledgers that we're talking about, or the Regen ledger in specific that the folks at Regen have been discussing, they take oracles as their input around the state of what the world is. And oracles are commons. They're subject to social dilemmas in just the same way that like fisheries or aquifer commons are. So, and not just being a means to own the protocol, but also how are DAOs oracles? How are they inputs into the ledger? And like along that path is to say, how do communities actively sense, verify, and maintain their understanding of ecological state in a place that they call home? So rather than being a decentralized protocol of ownership, it's really more one of decentralized sensing and verification. And with that comes governance. Okay, so this is maybe summoning a little bit of Sam's presentation. Historically, the power for people to put information onto a ledger has been held by a, broadly speaking, highly centralized, highly opaque entity. And they have the right to input things onto ledgers with something that's effectively a proof of authority or a proof of work, like how many PDF pages are in your monitoring report. So these third-party verification systems or like trad cli-fi registries, they own the means of reputation, and then they leverage that to like make a lot of money out of it. And I would venture to say that one of the fundamental core problems in decentralized regenerative economics is to approach the verification question. Because if you really, really read the white papers on almost all of these projects, there's almost always some proprietary institutional form by which it vets what's real and what isn't. So here's a prompt, like the proof of work, proof of authority, proof of stake consensus process that we use to upload the content of blocks onto a chain must be reestablished into like verification of ecological state. The same question exists around what is the ecological state. So Regen Registry is the most sophisticated effort I've ever seen, and I'm obviously biased at trying to build a decentralized version that tries to outgrow that trad, opaque, centralized flavor. And to do that, we have to unlearn a lot of institutions and make new kinds that are populated with lots of different things. And I think DAOs are an incredible opportunity to talk about assemblages that are more than just people, and they're also more than just like organisms, but the sort of monitoring systems, the information, the biotic and abiotic factors. So, okay, the shape of DAOs to come. I'm pretty convinced that decentralized protocols around ownership, governance, and sensing are the future. I'm just fully committed to that, and that we have in front of us this incredible opportunity to start designing and making new kinds of institutions. Or maybe we could call them extitutions, or maybe we could call them something else. I'm still in community, we're all working that out. But these new kinds of assemblages is maybe a stable way to describe it, hybridize ecological and social systems because they aren't different. We all know that. And if you didn't know that, social systems and ecological systems are never separate. And it makes it really hard to talk about sometimes. So you might say the word eco-social, which is just a silly thing to say, but it helps drive the point home. And so we could look at this to say, well, people have made these sort of meta conglomerates, these sort of larger assemblages that we call institutions, and they oftentimes have columns and stuff. And the earth can be contoured and understood to be a series of different assemblages that have discrete patterns in behavior, like bioregions. So maybe there's some real potential to start talking about bioregional institutions and what that looks like. And I think under the hood, we're beginning to destabilize the basic unit of analysis around how economics and life work, because it's not just people or individuals, it's people and the environment as an assemblage together, always. So let's get into some specifics about how that works in Regen. At the foundation, our flagship program is called the Community Staking DAO. And I think it's one of the most interesting and profound things that Regen has going for it. It's an application-specific blockchain that takes its sovereignty incredibly seriously. And it's not just running on other people's hardware, but take the validator set and the sort of integrity of the blockchain sovereignty very seriously. And there's a phrase, I don't really gamble very much, but there's a phrase in gambling that says the house always wins, which is to say, whatever entity owns the system or the instruments which define value, they always win. So who gets to define what that is? So as part of the project at Regen Network more broadly, and as the sort of core mandate of the Regen Foundation, is to take 35% of the total token holding power of our network and put it into the hands of regenerative communities, whether that be working in open source hardware, software, scientific community, indigenous communities, local communities, etc. And so that brings about a community stake model. But you might think, okay, like having indigenous communities in local context govern the protocol, that sounds like hard, and it is. So we created this community staking DAO. We run through cohort cycles, which is a way for people to create affinity and connection, both based off of their expertise, but also based off of their location. And cohorts just make it more digestible for a very small organization to like keep the heartbeat, but it basically beats like a heart, where the ownership of the protocol is increasingly transferred into the hands of regenerative communities all over the globe. If you want to know or talk more about community staking DAOs with me, I'd love to talk about that. I feel like the CS DAO is like a keel. There's a lot of capricious, speculative market forces blowing this vessel around. And that what this project does is that it grounds the network in regenerative people in context. And so we meet in person, but we also meet on Zoom pretty regularly. And it's like literally making the protocol touch the earth, like the metaphor of a keel to like be a counterbalance. And that's the community staking DAO. But what it opens up as a possibility is the space to experiment more broadly with prototyping grassroots DAOs. Because in order to govern the protocol, so many other things have to be satisfied. This is a group in Cambodia, Smart Agro, that's working in regenerative rice cultivation, and they're like on the process of developing, getting on DAO and doing internal governance processes with themselves. It's really exciting. Wow. This is another group, GVK Society in India, also part of the value chain, supply chain, that they're interested in working with blockchain to trace and track like integrity and sourcing of goods and materials. But like, this is what it looks like. These are DAOs. It's like people spending time together. It's awesome. And so the tool set supports not just like protocol scale governance, like weighing in on Commonwealth, but it has this amazing potential to have features for intra-community governance. So it's not just governing the whole network, but like, how does this community want to govern themselves? Or how do they want to adopt their particular practice towards a particular end? And it is not like anything new, like savings cooperatives or communally owned entities that practice governance is not invented with Web3. Maybe one of the coolest things that Web3 has done is that it's re-foregrounded the commons and that potential in a whole new way. This is Shaila Agha. She's awesome. She's my colleague at Regen Foundation. This is her in Watamu, Kenya, working with a group called Chama DAO. Chama is historically all women-led, but they're more diverse than that. There's also men in them, but they're like savings cooperatives, informal savings cooperatives. And they gather together and practice governance. And some of those actually look like lock boxes that have multiple keys on them, so that in order to access the treasury of funds, every person has to unlock the box. It's literally a multi-sig. And that's been going on for a long time. So DAO technology has a ton to learn from this. And the Chamas have a lot to like benefit from the sort of durability and the auditability and transparency made possible with on-chain governance. So I really like that reciprocal loop. I think that's one of the core parts of the DNA of Regen. Oh yeah, so in specific, what these people are talking about right now is the design of an eco-credit around mangrove reforestation in East Africa. Similar process that you've heard now quite a bit about in Shadamensa around the Jaguar credit design. This is what that looks like. So I think there's a kind of generalizable form of DAOs that maybe we can glean from this. And on the one side, we have like the first ledger, that's the Earth, and the sort of governance models we've learned from the Earth. And the other one is the sort of software ledger and the governance models we've learned from the software ledger. So when we talk about that with the commons and like the biosphere, we can call that community resource management or common pool resource management. That's the term for it. And if you're into like Linux or open source software or blockchains and things like that, you might call that open source software governance, but they're so close. So the game in no uncertain terms is to find meaningful ways to like integrate those two systems together. Like the governance model of Linux is incredibly relevant to how Nepali farmers govern their like aqueducts that like water their farms and vice versa. And so in between those two, maybe we'll just call that ecological institution governance. And I'm just going to say like, I'm broadly calling these ecological institutions. So this is maybe where it gets a little bit more specific because a lot of what we understand to happen in Web3, you know, it happens on blockchain, which is effectively everywhere or nowhere or wherever your validator set is. And it allows different protocols to happen for ownership, like of currency, for sensing and verification, of participatory verification or whatever that might look like. And then of course, governance and it sits there, but it's like unkeeled, like there's no ground symbol. So what we've been focusing on at the foundation for the last, say, 2 years is how to like integrate that decentralized protocols of ownership, governance, and sensing with the current movement in like Earth-centric law, which is the rights of nature movement. And so what the rights of nature movement has attempted to do, and is in some ways successful and in other ways isn't, is to give legal standing to non-human entities. And corporations are persons, but it's very hard for the blue whale to be a person. So we've already done the mental gymnastics to understand that like rights and personhood could be assigned to like a non-human, like a corporation. That's a kind of a weird assemblage of people. And now we should just extend that out to like the whole litany of other organisms and non-human things that are there. So, okay, an ecosystem like the Snake River in Idaho or a patch of forest along the Pastaza River, the state's granted legal standing. Ecuador keeps coming up for good reason. They have incredibly progressive rights of nature law. And so now it's a person, it has legal standing. And one of the core premises of being a person is the right to own something. But there has not been a technical way for non-human entities to own things yet. So you weld those two things together, the potential for there to be ownership, sensing, and governance with the legal standing that the rights of nature movement has provided. And now we're building some kind of new Earth native institution, new kinds of institutions, or institutions, etc. So I'm going to walk through what a couple of these look like, and we're not going to spend a ton of time on them, but I'll give you a link to a paper that tries to do justice. I'm going to call this loop like a pretty sacred thing. Maybe you could call it a loop of stewardship. Maybe you could call it reciprocity. On the right-hand side, you have an ecosystem. It's like a habitat or an ecology. And what it does is it sustains stewards, like it sustains our life world, like water to drink and air to breathe and ground to walk on. Like it makes our life world. And in some cases, like in stewardship cases or in real regenerative cases, the care and labor that the steward puts back into the ecosystem makes the ecosystem ever more capable of sustaining it. And I would say that this loop is like a loop of reciprocity, and it's like that's like what makes us human, is doing this, is that we make the world ever more capable of supporting us, and then we support it. So that's a loop, that's a cool loop. So here's an exercise. We might take that ecosystem and say it has legal standing, and that's that dotted line around there. And within that legal entity now, we have either like a unincorporated association or zero member LLC or a legal person. Those are the three main ones in the States, Wyoming DAO, like Wyoming LLC. Then they could, the ecosystem itself now has like an endpoint in blockchain space. And so you can own its own data. Like it can maybe in the form of NFTs or like or in the form of photography. It could have deeds, like it could own titles or contracts to its own land tenure. And then, of course, obviously, it could own currency. So the ecosystem then has like a fund. It's basically a treasury of some kind. And so now we've built this kind of institution where the stewardship persists. Like that's what we build the whole thing off of. It's all rooted in reciprocity. But now, in not just being supported by like water or air or like timber to build your homes, ecosystems are directly paying their stewards for the stewardship. And so we say, okay, well, how does that work? That seems like that's kind of tricky to get right. And it totally is, but I want to point at it being like a big design space. And I'll close with sort of like a heady version of it, and I'll walk you through it. Where like, okay, an ecosystem has legal standing, and it has a blockchain address. And say there's like a smart contract that sits on top of it that takes input from an oracle, like an earth monitoring system. And so maybe the earth monitoring system says like the line of deforestation has been maintained, or it hasn't been maintained. If it has been maintained, it says, for some contract, it says, has this been maintained? And it says yes. Then it issues up like a retroactive compensation pool, like in DAO or something, to say who did the work to help maintain this line of the forest. And then people do a governance process on that to say like who showed up to support that process. Any number of like proof of impacts might be integrated there, or we might say it's just totally algorithmic. It's like an autonomous ecological institution where like an oracle input is causing it to do certain behaviors. They're more like little agents than like big complex institutional designs. So if you're interested, this is not public, but you can scan this QR code, and this is like it's not super long. It's a paper that I'm going to publish really soon, and it's in collaboration with Regen Network, in support from all the dialogues we've had, also with the Earth Law Center, which is a preeminent rights of nature legal group, where I go really far into what this looks like. And I think that generally, like one trend I might close with is that what we inherited was an understanding of the Earth as a system of objects that were more or less like resources that we could extract. And then what the rights of nature and some of the Web3 world has allowed is for us to think about a world more populated with subjects, that like a blue whale could be a person, or that a patch of like that a forest, like a river, say, is like has a subjecthood, it's animate in some way, it has rights and things like that. And we go from the object resource model to an ecological subjects model, and where we land is institutions. We're building new kinds of institutions. And those institutions could plug into the regenerative economic process in all these different points, because they're a way of like a DAO that's grounded. And so the Regen Foundation is like going all in on that as a premise, because we think it's really exciting. And so we have a bunch of pilots lined up for that, and we're like literally going to be using DAO, like what Jake showed, some of that functionality to integrate this. It's all already here. I think what's really urgent is to find like good use cases that seem like they're appropriate to the context and the specificities of site. So if you have ones that you're excited about or want to collaborate on this, I'm super all ears. And of course, we're a nonprofit, so if you want to make a tax-deductible donation to the Regen Foundation and support this kind of work, please come and talk to me. Thank you. That's my email.